Welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast. In these sessions, we meet the most amazing and interesting people. We learn about their passions, their business models, cool new technologies, and of course, their lessons on personal growth. I hope you enjoy. In this boardroom session, we meet Evan Jafa. Evan's the CEO and founder of Cloudify, Inc. He was previously the CIO at First American for more than 15 years. He was the CIO at CoreLogic, which was a spinoff of First American. And at Cloudify, Inc., he takes all of that knowledge and process and methodologies and puts them into play in his new role where he's helping companies figure out how to move to the cloud, why to move to the cloud, why not to move to the cloud, and what they can do once they get there. Looking forward to sharing Evan's conversation with you. I'm sure you're going to love it. Evan Jafa, welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you having the time and taking the time to come be with us today. So you are the principal and CEO of Cloudify, Inc., right? That's how you and I've met, and plus you've been very busy here in the community, and most people may know your name or may know of you by your background here, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But first of all, tell us about Cloudify, Inc.
Thanks very much. Hello, everybody, and I appreciate everybody's time. Cloudify started about 7 years ago, and the basis of Cloudify was a methodology that was developed during the virtualization process that was a private network somewhere in the last 15 years established. And that methodology's maturity ultimately became the fundamental basis for starting the Cloudify company.
Okay. So you've used your experience that you've gained in various leadership roles in IT, best practices and thought process, and we're going to dive deep. So for folks that are into the technology and into a lot of the high-level terminology, we're not going to get engineering level, but we're going to definitely talk about the concepts here of the cloud. So let's walk through a little bit of your background. It may help people understand why you're so passionate about what it is that you do here. So you were the CIO and CTO at First American Corporation.
That's correct. If I can, I'll tell everybody very quickly that I started with an economics degree, and I really have a different view of the world than most of my friends in this capacity. And during the college days, I actually had a job at a company as a computer operator. And that is many, many years ago. And the eventual path brought me to California from Texas. And at First American, I was CTO. And First American at the time was significantly growing. The markets of First American were significantly growing. And the company was acquiring. And the dynamic of the many acquisitions and the growth needed a strategy for when we acquire a new company. What do we do with the systems and the applications and the software and all of those assets that were acquired?
Mm-hmm. Do you just mold them into the Borg and make them force into yours, or do you take their assets and take the hybrid approach and let some of those servers and application sprawl go on? There's a lot of things to think about.
I was part of advisory of one of the large technology companies, and I'm a big fan of the CEO. He had a very specific model for acquisitions. Basically what they did is first day they said HR, legal, and IT is a corporate function. Everything else stays independent, and you folks know your space, know your product, so continue doing that. But it is best for HR and legal and IT to be a central function. So we took that very same approach. And I remember, the story. I was one of the early adopters of VMware. And we started establishing a VMware platform. And to put action behind that acquisition strategy, as we started bringing some of these new acquisitions into the central function, we used this common platform. At the time, there was no terminology of cloud or any terminology of private or hybrid or anything of that nature. We called it the common platform. And that common platform became the destination for the migration of most of these acquisitions assets into the core platform.
Which is the early beauty of VMware, right? Was that you could make these virtual machines and you could host them anywhere, right? They could be hosted on any machine with the right configuration, but the machine could be in one data center, multiple data centers. It could be in a third-party data center, right? So it was the early roadmap for what we consider the cloud today.
Absolutely. And anecdotally, for the first 2 years that we had this common platform, the major application and software providers, your audience will know the name of all of these companies. They actually sat in front of us and said, this platform is not supported. If you have trouble with our products, we cannot provide support.
Because they were unfamiliar with how to run their machines on a VM, right?
That's correct.
Right, on a virtual machine.
That's correct. So this platform did become that private cloud, we would refer to it as today, that housed all of these technologies and eventually accomplished the objective, which was centralization of majority of these acquisitions into our two primary locations.
That's a very early description of the challenge and the solution and the promise of cloud, right? But in today's terminology, we would call that you built a virtual machine private cloud, right?
That's exactly right.
But at that time, that was revolutionary, and that was a architectural design, and then became a business process design. So you're definitely an early adopter there, right?
That's correct.
And so for those of you that don't know, First American is a large conglomerate of many different companies with many different services under the umbrella that you offer, right?
That's exactly right.
And I've heard some staggering figures around the amount of data that First American has, right? So
massive.
Yeah, essentially every title in the history of the United States, I've heard. Is that accurate?
Well, not just title. We had information in regards to every property in the United States, majority of the counties of the United States. That's how we would look at the world, as counties.
All the real estate and records and
And
information.
we had the information about the history of the ownership and the current ownership, meaning we had all the information about you.
Yeah.
We had the credit information about you. We had the market information about the real estate market as a whole.
Yep.
And mortgage market specifically. So a tremendous amounts of information.
Petabytes of information.
Many
petabytes of information, right? So that's a big job. And so that is going to come into play here as we discuss what we think about the cloud, that you were in this game a long time and early and making strategic decisions with budget, with resources around it. And First American's thriving today. So good job. Good job on what you did there as an early adopter. You also spent some time at CoreLogic, where you did similar roles, CTO, CIO.
That's correct. At CoreLogic, which is the data analytics company, and was the result of a divestiture of First American's certain assets that CoreLogic was formed. And currently, CoreLogic provides analytics and market information and data to the mortgage industry, real estate industry, and even to the consumers. And for a period of time, we were responsible for the technologies of, my team was responsible for the technologies of CoreLogic.
Okay. So again, you learned, use the same tactics and thought process that you were working with at First American now in one of their subsidiaries, a very large subsidiary, also with many petabytes of information, right? And you have those similar character traits there that you brought aboard?
Yeah, if there's a commonality in the thought pattern of doing the job for these companies, was I am a big fan of innovation, and I think the people that innovate are great people, and I follow a lot of early innovative companies. But when you're talking about innovation in the context of a corporation, company, especially large entities, it has to serve very specific needs of the business. Innovation for the sake of innovation in these companies has next to no value.
Unless you're starting a company around that innovation, right? A technology company. And that's what Silicon Valley does.
That's right.
They innovate despite just to innovate and then come up with a company business model.
But for all other verticals and industries, innovation is mostly an enabler than it is the product. So in my opinion, for an effective CIO, CTO, and leaders of technology, to bring the appropriate innovations at the right time that serves the top line and the bottom line of the company you're working for best, is when you become an effective leader of technology, or a CTO or CIO, or whatever your title might be.
Right. And so you're bringing that mindset right now. You just kind of gave the value proposition for Cloudify Inc., right? Is bringing that thought methodology to the company, right? And asking the right questions and making sure they're in it for the right reasons, and are looking for the right outcomes that are actually deliverable, because there are a lot of outcomes that people might be looking for that moving to the cloud may not help them with.
That's right.
And so that's what you do here. That's fantastic lead in here, and we'll dive deeper into the cloud here in a moment. But very interesting background. So lots of growth and lots of business strategy and lots of IT and technology leadership. How did you get into IT in the very first place? Let's take a little trip down memory lane.
As I already kind of quickly mentioned, during my college days, I was actually a computer operator at a company in Houston, Texas. And my family, and especially my father specifically, wanted me to become a doctor. So I actually have gone through the entire pre-medical process, student. But I found out that that is not something that I want to pursue. So I shifted to economics. And when I graduated in Houston, I'm not sure what I could do with a economics degree. So I continued making my previous job my career rather than my degree my career. And I continued in the let's call it the IT world, and moved to California. And shortly after I moved to California, I actually became a director of IT for a former company that existed in Orange County, and then to a previous acquisition of First American, and then into First American.
Oh, wow. So you were in the family for quite some time.
Correct.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And so that's, most people I talk to, believe it or not, happenstance them into their way into IT, right? Me included. I went to hotel restaurant school and thought I was going to be running the large, sales department for a big hotel chain, and that didn't happen. And I ended up coming into technology right away. I got into telecom. So many folks find their way that way, right?
That's right.
So however it happens, and here we are. Now we have a passion for technology.
Exactly.
Right? So that passion has also led you into the venture world, right? The VC world. And so tell us about your position right now at the IOC.
As I already mentioned, Mike, I'm a big fan of innovation. That really is my passion about, what drives people to innovation, and what are the innovators, thought process and everything else is in order to accomplish what they want to accomplish. As I stepped away from the enterprise world and started Cloudify. When I started talking about what I'm doing with Cloudify with some of my friends, and started getting familiar with the startup community of Orange County, a few of us got together and decided maybe we can help some of these innovators of Orange County. So we started a fund called IOC Ventures. It's almost 2 years old, and we are about to invest in our 12th startup.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
And the criteria for us for these startups are the founders themselves. If you find that we align with their passions, their objectives, and their innovative thinking, then we get behind them. And IOC Ventures is going to continue doing that, hopefully.
That's great. So what's the state of the venture capital world here in Orange County? I've heard it called, Tech Beach and things like that. They've used terminologies for that. So
Sure.
there's definitely some growth. The UC Irvine is putting a bunch of effort and time there. They've got the Tech Coast initiative there. What do you see here as the draw in Orange County?
Absolutely. So I think the dynamics of Orange County are maybe slightly different than maybe Northern California and even Los Angeles. A lot of folks in Orange County are involved with their own companies and their own enterprises, but they also showed an interest in the startups, and they wanted to get behind some of the startups, invest in some of those startups. And since Orange County has a great set of folks that usually support these new initiatives, it really started from that angle versus from the startup angle. A lot of investors exist in Orange County that are interested.
There's a lot of wealth in Orange County.
Correct. They're interested to get involved with the startups, especially the ones that are lining up with their own industries or their interests.
Sure.
And those two dynamics caused, this whole energy in Orange County of, why don't we start looking at the world of a startup at a greater level? And of course, the initiatives of UC Irvine, which I'm a graduate of, significantly helped. And entities like IOC Ventures, there are many now within Orange County. Tech Coast Angels is another entity that is great.
Correct.
And these entities started kind of putting a lot of energy and time and, of course, money behind the startup. And that's how the Orange County startup community is moving forward.
That's great. So on a separate note, I look forward to working with you on that and seeing how I can put some resources as a prolific networker and friend of some folks with some means. We can definitely do some work there.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that. Yes.
So let's talk about Cloudify Inc. in particular, right? Let's talk about the cloud in general, right? So we've overused that term, and you and I were just recently at an event last week where I was interviewing a client, David Baker, and we talked about what the definition of the cloud was, and you have a different definition of the cloud. He had a unique one that you thought was interesting, but what's your definition of the cloud?
Yeah, for as long as I can remember in my time in the IT world, there has always been the option of outsourcing IT. A lot of organizations and a lot of folks may be looking at the cloud as just another form of outsourcing, meaning not in my data center, but your data center.
Sure. We called that managed hosting for many years. Some people took their servers and moved them out into other data centers. We called that co-location.
Exactly.
Right?
And that was a great big industry, yeah.
And so that's not what your definition of the cloud is today, right? So you can't just take your machines and move them to some other place and call that the cloud.
I think the fundamental difference in my definition and any other definition is the absolute automation and orchestration layers above the infrastructure that makes that underlying infrastructure a cloud. And short of and having less automation and orchestration as the overlaying layer, really makes that again an outsourcing process or co-location exercise rather than a cloud technology.
Okay. So for those of you that aren't as savvy, we're talking about the fact that the machines and the software that loads on top of the machines out in the cloud have a very set and very easy way of loading themselves and developing and sprawling for scale. Right. If they need to. Another machine's needed for some services, they automatically happen. They don't need to have human intervention to do so, right?
Well, and I gotta give majority of the adoption of the cloud to early developers. Developers wanted to quickly test an idea, and another dynamic about the cloud, at least the start of the cloud, was the fact that you could swipe a credit card and get a server up and going, and within an hour, you could be loading your code and testing your assumptions about the code that you were writing. That ease of consumption and lack of friction or duration of time for consumption of compute and storage is another angle that makes cloud. I totally tell you that we just had an engagement and we were at the customer location, and the IT said we have a great private cloud. And we were interviewing various groups within the company. As we started to actually talk to the end users and the development organizations, they said it takes up to 30 to 40 days to actually get a virtual server.
That's their company's policy because they have processes and procedures to allocate resources and to make sure that things are done within the process. They have time to deploy it and they have the right resources assigned to do the deploying, right?
Well, in companies, you got to have some form of a governance. Otherwise, things very quickly will...
But 30 to 40 some days in today's environment is beyond governance, and I would call that a detriment to doing
and
business.
It makes that platform not a cloud.
Yeah.
So the fact that the early providers of cloud were able to make the consumption frictionless is probably one of the significant reasons why cloud started to grow faster and faster. That lack of having to wait for internal IT organizations or whatever compliance or governance that was in place was the attraction for the early developers.
Right.
I swipe a credit card and get up.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't have any layers. They didn't have to go through their own internal processes to fire up a dev machine.
That's right.
They could just do it, right? They could also do it in a little test environment.
That's right.
But that's not the core group today that we're addressing. The core group today we're addressing are business processes, business software tools, integration into SaaS tools, and this maddening sprint to get all of my resources out into the quote unquote cloud, right? Sure. And so there's a whole lot of reasons why not. There's a whole lot of reasons why to do that, right? But it seems to me that most companies are hell-bent on going that direction regardless. And so here lies the question for you. What's the key advantage other than dev, right? Other than test and dev, which is an obvious one that you just described. Other than that, why would you want to hurry up and move all of your resources out of your own internal data center and into a cloud?
Yeah, I like to, maybe I'm oversimplifying this categorization. I like to look at what enterprises and companies use in three buckets of categories. One is what I call back office. The other is the bucket that I call productivity. And then a bucket that's core to the business.
Okay.
Let's take each one of those buckets and talk about cloud in the context of those tools and products.
You bet.
So if you look at the back office, human resources, financials, billing, I think in today's world, you and I are going to be hard pressed to find a company that's just going to go and buy the CDs for a new HR system, bring it in-house, buy the servers, install those applications so they can have an HR platform.
Right. No, they're not going to. And if they do, they're missing some obvious opportunity.
And the reason for it is not just the fact that the providers of HR in the cloud are significantly successful, or financials, or any of those types of back office products. I remember multiple times in my career having to go to management and say we have to upgrade from this version of one of these back office products to the other version because the vendor just moved on to the new version. And the management would ask me, so what's the benefit of that for us? Well, we can still get support from them. It wasn't really a good business rationale for spending sometimes many millions to upgrade to a new version of some of the products. Right now, the product is updated. You wake up in the morning, is the new version, and you're consuming it. All your data is there. Everything works. You didn't spend millions. You didn't take 2 years to upgrade to that. Therefore, all of those business dynamics causes that back office set of products to be consumed as a service, SaaS, whatever you want to call it, but consumed as a service because now HR can get it quickly, configure it the way they want. They don't have to send the request every time they want to change something to an IT organization. And it just works. And I think that's the fundamental of that back office.
And I think the vast majority of my clients have a SaaS model for HR and for payroll and things of that nature. They either have a service or a software as a service.
Well, Salesforce, as you can see, Salesforce automation, Salesforce is successful due to that factor.
Sure.
You look at companies like Workday and companies of that nature, SuccessFactor, they're significantly growing the dynamic of companies are no longer buying CDs and installing them in-house on their own server in order to have an HR system.
That makes perfect sense for the back office.
All right. So productivity is the bucket. I define it as the tools that are internally consumed by the employees, the users, the vendors, end users, let's call them as an entire category of users within a company that use it to be productive. Email is a perfect example, or any kind of collaboration tools, even telephony.
Ordering, internal ticketing tools.
Exactly.
Right.
All of those are a significant part of the growth of the primary cloud companies. The rationalization for you as a healthcare company managing your email, while it could be provided by a cloud provider and is updated constantly, they give you functions, features, you don't know when they do it, you don't have to have projects and efforts to do that, upgrade and bring new functions in, and it just happens. There is no rationalization strategically or financially for you to be in the business of email.
Right.
Therefore, it's a very easy decision for management to say, why don't we give it to the best, most cost-effective provider of the service and just consume it as a service.
Right. Not to mention that it's better consumed as a service than it is to be hosted by the company, right? Because now you have a much better platform to be able to get it on your mobile devices, from home, from another PC, from wherever you're traveling to. They've made it very easy.
It's almost like saying, I'm a hospital that provide care for patients, but I'm also going to make the medications that my patient use.
Yeah, you're not going to want to do that.
It's best to consume other experts, solutions. I can't come up with any rationalization for a company that's not in technology of email to actually work on email and not consume it as a service.
Correct.
So, significant portion of the cloud market's growth is now attributed to the movement of email, office products, collaboration tools, telephony. These are all the categories of that bucket that are moving at a much faster speed than when we started Cloudify into the cloud. And I think that the two buckets that we already talked about
Back
are
office
pretty
productivity.
much are now,
Yeah, standard.
if they're not in the cloud,
Right.
they're either being planned to go to the cloud or they're being forced by management to go to the cloud.
Sure.
That leaves the last bucket. The last bucket is what I call the core products. These are really the cash registers of any company. These are the fundamental software and platforms that support the business itself. As always, when you get to that aspect of the offerings of any company, you need to be significantly thoughtful. Any interruption, disruption, any change that would adversely impact revenue and your customer base is really not a good solution.
Yep.
So at Cloudify, when we started, we talked about all of these three buckets with significant thought and strategy, and as I mentioned, our methodology applied to, in the next 5 to 10 years, how should a company view the consumption of cloud for core services?
For their core services, right? And that depends on the business, right?
Exactly.
Everybody has a different business. There could be everything from manufacturing to healthcare to services to whatever their special sauce is, and you have to evaluate what it is that they're doing.
I remember a CIO of a company saying that we really, can fish. There's no reason for everything that we have not to be in the cloud. But if you're talking about a bank, if you're talking about a significant healthcare organization, if you're talking about many industries that have very, very specific requirements, compliance, regulatory obligations that they have to meet, that's not let's just move everything to the cloud and get it done.
Sure. So these are some of the things that you do and the way you break it down for the client as to an evaluation of where they are on their cloud posture, right? Like whether it's positive for them to make moves, and then you consult with them on certain types of SaaS to go to and certain types of methodologies to happen.
As I said early on, we talked about all those three buckets. Now it's very easy for the first two buckets. You need a new HR. Which one of the SaaS providers fits your requirements best and is optimally priced for your consumption is really the criteria.
Yep.
The core still remains a significant, and it needs to be, in my opinion, very thoughtfully done. And our methodology, our processes start looking at the entire set of platforms, applications, software that serves an enterprise very, very specifically and in significant detail. To give you a quick example, a test platform versus a development platform versus a staging platform versus a production platform. They're not the same.
No, they're not. They're all very different. And a lot of people bucketize those into one big bucket.
Yeah, and if you
test dev.
if you're, for whatever reason, shouldn't even today move your with the project for a human research health organization, their compliance and regulatory obligations was so heavy that even today I still don't see them moving to the cloud. Cloud needs to meet all of those, necessary requirements that they had for them to be in the cloud to still meet the regulatory obligations they have. But when you start looking at the test platform, or a staging or development platform, let's take the development. I would say that the majority of the developers would love to have, and probably have, and by the way, the growth of AWS and GCP and Azure, all of it started with developers.
Right.
And there are new cloud providers that are having nothing but developers on their platforms. They want fast. They want to be able to test their assumptions about their new product that they're developing. So maybe you can start putting a toe in the water just by moving the development platform for your core environment into the cloud. And then in the next 5 to 10 years, in an evolutionary way, which is definitely the way we look at the core systems, not lift and shift. There's a lot of conversations around lift and shift. We can talk about that if you'd like, in my opinion, about lift and shift. But if you want to do it thoughtfully, it really needs to be an evolutionary process.
Sure. And those are all testaments to how thorough you do what you do at Cloudify and how you go about finding the information key to that client of what they're trying to accomplish and think through all the things that only someone who ran a very large enterprise from an IT perspective could bring to the table. So that's very insightful information I'm sure that you're bringing to these clients. Let's talk about the promise of the cloud, right? So I have lots of clients that are heading out there, right, and find out that once they start integrating, all of these different SaaS applications together, they have this similar challenge that they had when they were in their data center, right? So in their data center, they might have had a large server infrastructure, hundreds of servers, dozens of software programs, and the interoperability of those programs was a challenge. It was a challenge in the rack. Yep. And now it's a challenge out in the world. As a matter of fact, some of the challenges are even theoretically bigger in the fact that the data is not in the same location, right? So a process could be, it having to dip into multiple different databases in literally different geographies, in different subsystems, right? But the sales folks and the idea is everything's an open API. Everything integrates with everything. You just press a couple buttons and everything's going to data dip into each other and get the information.
That's right.
It doesn't work that way. You know that, I know that. And so how do you deal with integration of these applications?
Absolutely. And that's a great topic because after we left the world of mainframe, integration became a significant part of any IT organization's service to the enterprises that they served. There were various solutions, point solutions, various types of vendors providing those solutions. One of the most significant parts of the effort of any IT organization was to make sure that everything works together and ultimately provides the solution that the business needs to its end users. So integration has always been a significant part of IT's value. And I think that is going to continue on, even in the world of cloud. In Cloudify, we believe that in 20 years, all companies are going to be moving majority of their functions to the cloud. They're going to be probably consuming many clouds. We're estimating an average of 15 to 20 clouds. Your telephony is going to be in a different cloud, and maybe your Salesforce automation in a different cloud. Mm-hmm. But as you would understand, your contact centers and Salesforce automation products need to feed each other in order to be most productive.
With less than milliseconds of information, exactly. Right, of integration.
So if you buy into the idea that all companies will be using many clouds, 15, 20, whatever the number might be, it continues to be a function of IT to ensure that these clouds are integrated, the products are speaking and providing information back and forth between each other, and ultimately the aggregate of the value of all these cloud is what serves your end user, and that integration, in my opinion, will always be part of the functions of IT.
Yep. And how are you solving the problem of integrating? Because right now I see a lot of branding ecosystems, right? So you brought up Salesforce. We'll just pick on Salesforce for a second. Right. So you have an extremely large ecosystem of folks that tie into Salesforce. And many of them are Salesforce specific, right? So if you were to choose to leave Salesforce as your CRM, your database for all of your folks, you would have to make a new decision on several of those piece part products, right?
Absolutely, and get ready for reintegrating. So I think we will always customize even the way we configure a SaaS product in order to use it to, the best purposes of our company. And if you start moving it, you want to be able to translate all of those configurations back into any new products and so on and so forth. So those points of integration will always be something that needs to be carefully looked at, and become a challenge at times. We've had occasions that folks wanted to have Salesforce still exchange information and data with some of their legacy platforms, where, let's say, most of the customer data was sitting. Those continue, and I think will continue to be areas that sometimes might need custom work.
This is you're making a great point for Cloudify, because there's a lot to consider in these situations, and I think the vast majority of the clients that I work with have inherited and or made decisions based on situational application situations, right? They've moved an HR app, they've moved a finance app, they've moved an email app, and then now they start to think about, oh wow, these maybe integrate to each other, maybe they're not in the same ecosystem. So there's some things that you can come and holistically look at and ask the hard questions.
Absolutely, and maybe the way I'm going to state this is just the way I look at it and nothing else. We have developed over time significantly sophisticated and complex solutions for the organizations. I'm talking about IT as a whole. That has been our ultimate value proposition to the organizations, that we could do very sophisticated and complex work. I don't think you can ever make complex and sophisticated simple. Just because we talked about cloud and you can swipe a credit card and get a virtual machine doesn't reduce from the fact that still the competitive advantage is to come out with the best products and offerings for your customers.
Right, your business.
And to have differentiating solutions for the clients and customers you have. All of those complexities and sophistication will continue no matter if the cloud was part of the conversation or not part of the conversation. And when you talk about that, you can't make those things just simple.
No,
you need to be thoughtful.
There's a lot of complexity to it.
You need to be thoughtful.
So you're making a very good case here, and why to think this through, why to work with somebody like yourself. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. So I know that you're cloud agnostic. You're here to talk with the client and help them through the whole process of what's best for their business, depending on their business model. But I'm going to pick on one of the clouds here, for example. I'm going to pick on AWS. Okay, so AWS has a really good reputation in upmarket, now starting to get to the mid-enterprise. In what they do with their envisioning sessions, right? So they put some resources at hand. They get some experts in the field of that client. They put them in a room together with the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, and they paint this story of nirvana, right? What if we could take your product and make it faster to market, make it cost less effective, make it a better product than the product that you had before, right? And they paint this business outcome picture that in almost every case I've ever heard after an envisioning session, people are skipping around an office and ready to write checks to AWS to do whatever they can to make that happen, right? That's not disruption. That's reliance on one provider's solution set, right? So talk to me about what you think.
Excuse me.
What you think they're doing there, and how you would caution a client in that regard.
One of the dynamics of market and open markets is competition in anything, not just technology. All of my friends in the world of IT have always made sure that they don't have a vendor lock-in situation because of what the technology choice they made. If it was in networking, in software, in buying a server, whatever, because vendor lock-in situation can be detrimental over time. Then the vendor can
up the price, make it difficult to
change
add
all
more
circumstances
licensing.
for you.
Yeah, just ask anybody who's bought a large Microsoft agreement over time.
Exactly. And so the point is that one of the dynamics of what large corporations, especially the management executives, want to know, okay, I'm ready to go to cloud, but what if something happens and I want to either change the provider or do something differently than what I am doing? I think at minimum for a large corporation to be able to put the entire bet of what's going to happen to their revenues and to their future on cloud, they need to thoughtfully look at how can I move out of where I just am planning to move into.
Right.
How could that be done? Because if you do not have a plan, I think you're taking.
So you want to look at an
Far
exit
too much
strategy right out the bat to say, if I can't exit quickly, then there's a challenge, right? Then
At
maybe I'm
minimum,
falling.
a roadmap that meets everyone's reasonabilities that we have in place just in case. It's an insurance for not letting any of these providers corner you and leave you with no options.
Right. And so these envisioning sessions go well beyond just the AWS cloud, right? It has all of their service, all their other providers that are there, all their other tenants, all their other businesses that are in there. They start this cross-pollination of, hey, you're a neighbor to this company and that company, and they can help you now. So it's their ecosystem and it's their customer base. And they make some very compelling arguments. They start name dropping all the companies that are in there and show you how they've done things differently, and it's a lot of sizzle.
Well, to their credit, name dropping always works. In any industry, if three of your primary competition does something, then you're much more comfortable to be the fourth. And name dropping helps that process. If you're in a certain vertical and certain industry and two or three of your primary competition has already moved to AWS, by just having them name those companies convinces me. I'm not sure about anyone, but it is good enough to convince someone to say, okay, maybe I should also do the same.
Sure.
Sure. That is a valid, definitely a marketing approach, and also a good reason for me to be the third or fourth in that vertical to be moving to a certain platform. What I'm talking about, this is going to be now as cloud takes hold, as more and more companies are adopting cloud, this eventual problem of I'm no longer happy with the provider and being able to have an option and choice is something that I think just about everybody will be faced with.
Sure. And you need to be able to know how to handle that, how to handle the exit strategy, right? So most people in a relationship have an exit strategy when it comes to a business. Everybody has separation documents that they have as business partners. So it's something to consider, and another piece of value that you're bringing to the table here to look at how you would be able to get out.
And Mike, management and executives want to know, what if under, maybe future and serious considerations and reasoning, I have to go. If I go, can I come out at any time?
Sure.
And I think that is a thoughtful part of being
Do you
able
own the
to.
data, right? That's a big.
Can I
That's a
get
big
my data
knock. Yeah,
back?
that's a
Right.
big knock on Salesforce, right?
That's right.
Like once you put your data in there, maybe
Can I get it back?
maybe you can't get it back. Maybe, and if you get it back, maybe it's going to live there forever, right?
And security and privacy and compliance and regulatory obligations is not the same as security and compliance. Regulatory obligation is that you need to meet certain criteria and someone has to actually prove that you have done that.
Sure.
Those are some of the significant consideration for entities that have those obligations when they want to move to the cloud.
Right.
And privacy, and now, as you're probably well aware, states like California, as Europe has done, is now enforcing certain privacy rules and so on and so forth. You got to be able to do all of those, otherwise you're not compliant, and you might actually.
An important note here: some of these cloud providers, as mentioned, and I'll pick on Microsoft right here. They have been slow to adopt some of that compliance, right? When it comes to things like ITAR and FISMA and these other federal regulations. If you're an average consumer with a few thousand users, you know what? You're not going to get it. Not from them. Not anytime soon. If you're 100,000 users, you have the ability to do it, or even 10,000 users, you could get ITAR compliant, but not everybody has 10,000 users and wants to pay 10,000 licenses to get something.
And Mike is not like you can just pick up the phone and call somebody at one of these cloud providers and start complaining about the fact that things are not going well or the service is just disrupted, and you need it back right away because
Sure.
my clients are screaming in our call centers or so on and so forth. So that's the other dynamic.
That's right. And there's services that we can consult with our clients to make sure that they get that kind of support when they do move to those clouds. So
That's right.
It's a multi-cloud strategy that I'm seeing most often, right?
Absolutely.
Different clouds for different resources, right? Google's making some huge inroads. They have 5 million interactions a day. If you think about every time somebody talks to Google, right? They say it's 5 million on average per day of interactions they have. They can take that data and they can get better and better and better and better with those interactions. They have a virtual assistant now, right?
Yep.
That's that you like a Hey Siri, like Apple's Siri.
Absolutely.
It's Hey Google, right? When you talk to Google, it's getting smarter, better, faster, and it's going to take the human out of a lot of the customer interactions, I think. And why wouldn't you do that? With that kind of AI power they have within their data as well, in their data sets, they have some very unique ability to do things in the healthcare industry. They're doing AI on X-ray images and making decisions and making recommendations based on photographic data, not just X-ray, but other photographs as well. And so that's some pretty good AI that you could marry into your business if your business warranted something like that.
Absolutely. And, in my entire career, only 3 or 4 events really matter that changed, at least for the companies and the enterprises, the dynamic of consumption of IT. When PCs were introduced into the market and when PC software was becoming widely available, they actually democratized computing for everyone. Everyone could now own a computer,
Right.
and do the kinds of things that previously was set aside for companies that could afford many millions in investment. Democratization of compute happened when PC happened.
Mm-hmm.
The other significant dynamic of cloud is democratization of analytics, AI, and consumption of those services. Previously, it was set aside for companies that could afford to invest millions.
And they had to write their own code, and they had to have their own AI, and they had to have their own algorithms that were doing that kind of. Now you can tap into the cloud to do that and utilize some AI that's there, like a Google with 5 million plus interactions a day.
And consume as much compute as you want.
Sure.
If, of course, you're able to pay for it.
Sure.
Analysis that previously had taken certain companies 6 months to be able to run through the entire model could possibly more cost effectively be ran over a period of 3 days on unlimited resources of cloud, which is the other value proposition of cloud, which is it makes boundless resources available for companies to run massive analytics models that they want to run, even if they're a very small company.
So those are some huge advantages for looking at the cloud and for looking at a multi-cloud strategy, right? I do think that that's the trend that I'm seeing today. I think that's often going to be a recommendation, I would imagine, of what to do, because there's different clouds that utilize different purposes, right?
Absolutely.
I have one client in particular that's a very large AWS shop, right? They've grown up in AWS, they've developed processes, they've written their own software that now is production software that's coming out of AWS. They look to SaaS providers that are inside AWS so they can stay adjacent to those applications
Right.
and share data between them. However, when it comes to doing certain AI buckets, they're looking elsewhere, right?
Absolutely.
Plus, they have a big email presence and a big customer service entity that's in the Microsoft cloud. So they might need to have some resources there so they can develop closely there or host those things there. So that's an example that I'm seeing.
Absolutely. And I think another um, reason that I think IT will continue to add value when they continue that innovation process for the organizations that they're working for and at. And um, the age of disruption is upon us. Um, if you would actually ask significant and large companies, executives, what are some of their current concerns and today's concerns, at the corner of their eye, they're watching companies that might come with a new model
Sure, a
very
disruptive
quickly
model, right?
and disrupt their business model.
For sure.
And cloud is one of the enablers of that fast movement. So the IT's value continues to be, how do we provide those new and disruptive solutions for our organizations so we stay competitive. So IT continues to be that, and it has always been of value to organizations because we really brought those kinds of values to the organizations that we
But
work at.
today's environment, people are expecting faster, quicker, better, right? They don't necessarily looking for cheaper. I don't think that, I know that's a misleader that a lot of people think they're going to save money by going to the cloud, but I think most clients are savvy to the fact that that's probably not the case for them. There's going to be some cost, but there's some extreme advantages of how you can gain other resources, right? You can gain better staffing, you can gain better predictability,
That's right.
you can gain a lot of other things there. But while we're talking about those things, this is what you do for the client. This is what Cloudify does for a client, is you dive into the details. You talked about the buckets of the back office, the production, right? You talked about the actual business, the core processing,
Absolutely,
the core
yeah.
business unit, and how you go about that. You talked about all of those different cloud technologies we talked about. We talked about integration. You do a deep, dark, lengthy investigation with these clients to find out what they're looking to do and build a strategy for them.
Absolutely. And as I already tried to describe it, we did sophisticated and complex work, and you can't just simplify it to a point that you push buttons and things happen.
Yeah.
It still is complex.
Right.
And if you want to do it right, you need to do it thoughtfully. You need to do it in an evolutionary way. And at Cloudify, we started with the strategy. And when we said cloud, mostly the IT organization said, no, we're not ready for anything of that nature. That conversation has fully changed now. And in the past 3 or 4 years, as we produce strategy, roadmap, actionable plan for consumption of cloud, folks have asked us to actually help them implement. So now we are along for the clients that are wishing for us to be along to do the implementation of whatever functions they're consuming to the primary cloud providers. And we continue to remain agnostic because of that, because our intention is to serve our customers' objectives best rather than the provider's objectives.
Of course, I like that model. That's Mike's model as well. So
Right.
it's whatever the client needs, and we'll go to market and find it. Right.
Exactly.
You're building enterprise processes, proven enterprise level processes and methodologies. Before that, you're doing a large investigation to find out why and how and what would be the best method to move. Right. And then you're helping these folks all the way along the journey to whatever extent that they need.
Yeah, I think, significant consulting companies have always done that for large enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, and so on and so forth. The problem now is that the speed needs to be different.
Yeah.
And you don't have to wait for the end product of the engagement to decide what do you need to do next.
Yeah.
So there's lots of conversations around being agile and so on and so forth. We have actually adopted the agile development methodology to delivering services. So what we do is, as we are looking at the entire picture, we start actually delivering in sprints of delivery, not longer than 6 weeks to 2 months.
Okay.
So when we're engaged, we actually start showing results right away with low-hanging fruit sometimes with things that are obvious.
Sure.
But it is not an exercise of let's sit down like previous consulting exercises, learn everything about you, and then come up with a three-ring binder full of information that shows you what is best. We actually deliver as we are looking at complex things over time for evolutionary methodologies, and immediate delivery for those kinds of things that an organization can right away benefit from.
That's awesome. That we can get busy making some actionable changes.
Fast matters, Mike. These days, fast is one of the competitive advantages.
It does. And I also believe, and I'm going to keep saying this and over, I think service matters. I think the new generation of youth today are more tuned into how the experience is of whatever product service they're buying, as much as that service element. They're far less interested in how much it costs. Maybe it's my dollar they're spending and my kids I'm talking about, but it has to do with that experience. And I read recently that 80% of all companies find their primary competitive differentiator is on service.
Yeah, absolutely. My kid bought one of those watches. I won't name the name of the company, and it actually had a problem. And of course, previously she was just worried about feature function, the kinds of things she can do with it, and so on and so forth, until she actually needed it to be serviced. Mm-hmm. And when we went there, they said you have to mail this in, and it will take 2 to 4 weeks for them to repair it and return to you. And her question to them was, why is it taking that long? Why can't you fix it right now?
Yeah.
So even that generation, I don't think you will ever change the dynamic of companies that always succeed have the best services for their client.
Correct.
That to me, maybe I'm looking at the world in an old-fashioned way.
I'm with you. So
service always matters.
It's speed and service are big ones in today's environment.
Yep.
So we're talking about business outcomes, and that's part of the equation that you run for the client. So Evan, tell us, where can we find you? I recently found you at the Orange County Technology Professionals Group, right? You were at our mixer. You get around at the IOC ventures, and you're at the Tech Coast and doing things over at UC Irvine and their innovation labs and things. Where else can we find you?
Yeah, I'm always glad and happy to be talking to the folks that are smarter than I and know more about the world of innovation, space of cloud specifically. So I'd love to meet and be able to talk to various folks. I never assume that what I know is all that's needed to be known.
No, we're always learning.
And I think is a pleasure and a privilege for me to meet folks that think about some of these dynamics that you and I have talked about differently and see it from their angle of view. And there's always merit to learning more about how you view a certain topic.
Good. So I'm going to leave the show notes here. I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile there. And also, you can be found at Cloudify Inc., right?
That's
here,
correct.
Orange County-based company,
Yes.
right here in the middle of heart of Irvine. And folks can reach you through me or reach you directly on the show notes there and meet Evan Jafa of Cloudify Inc. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, and thanks everybody. Thanks very much.
Hey, Mike here. Hope you liked this boardroom session. Please check back to your future sessions as we're recording a new one every month. If you want to reach out, look for me on LinkedIn or send me a note at mike@sidepath.com. That's mike@sidepath.com.